Hey guys, welcome to Hope It Helps. And my guest on the show today is Mr. Basel Anabtawi. Basel, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate that we're doing this. It's the right time. We're talking about podcasts, and we're
Yes, sir.
talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. No, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it, especially now. I know you're really busy at the moment, so thank you for your time. So Basil, I heard about you through, of course, Jamil through the Hamburger Generation, and I know you were on his podcast, and through another
Yeah.
friend of mine, and I know you had a podcast, and now you transitioned into a podcast company. So as someone in the same field, I'm like, I'd love to speak to you about just your journey and how you transitioned into a company and all that. But for the people who don't know, Basil, why don't you give all of us just a bit of a background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. I think I find it one of the oddest things in the world for me is talking about myself, because usually I'm in reverse.
Yeah.
I'm the one who's having a conversation with somebody and having them on my show. But yeah, I mean, look, my name is Basil. I'm just a guy who likes to podcast, and I got into podcasting a few years ago. In fact, I think I got into podcasting back in 2016, 2015, actually. 2015, because I like to run a lot. I'm a big runner, and I wanted to listen to something other than music when I was running, and I'm also really interested in American elections. So at the time the American elections were happening, and so I wanted to look for something that I could, that I could entertain me with that. So I started going on the Apple Podcast app just to check what was this thing all about. And then I found some NPR shows and MSNBC shows and stuff like that, and I started getting into podcasting. And one thing led to another, I started listening to more shows like Joe Rogan, and then I discovered Serial, which changed everything. And I decided that, hey, I could do this. I like to talk to people, and so I started my own show, which is Basel Meets. And since then, I worked with, I spoke to so many different guests, you know, people from just people who just have interesting stories. They don't necessarily have to be famous or anything like that. Just people who have interesting stories.
Sure.
And I've covered so many different stories, which was honestly amazing. And I love having these conversations with people because I feel like we become friends more than
Sure.
anything else. And yesterday I just did an episode yesterday with an ex-boss of mine, who was my boss
Okay.
10 years ago. Yeah, and he's like now the head of GM in the region, and and to a lot of people, this guy's intimidating and like, oh shit, this guy's like really high up there. And but after we had our conversation yesterday, I really felt that we were buddies. You know what I mean? And yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I love to do this show. But otherwise, I transitioned from being a podcaster to like actually starting a podcast company. It's called Rising Giants Network. I still do Basel Meets, and I still do. I've started a new show called Legendary Rock Stories, and yeah, and I'm married. I've got a lovely wife who put me on shape. I used to be much less healthier than this, and I got a beautiful boy. He's 1 year old. His name is Zane, and that's me really. I mean, there's so much about me, but I just don't know how to summarize it. But I'm sure it'll all come up in the conversation. Tell me more
Yeah,
about
yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. So, first of all, Beth, thanks for sharing that with us. Just giving us a little background always helps. And so 10 million things I need to ask you about. And first of all, I wanted to start at, so I know when I was doing my research, I know content is what you love, and that's what you're passionate about, and like creativity. So with Red Bull, with Enoch, with GM, it's all content, content, content. Now,
Yeah.
everyone's going to have a different answer to this question, but I'm curious to hear what your opinion is. If I ask you, I'm like, Basil, what makes a good piece of content? What would you say?
Oh shit, this feels like a job interview, man. um, a good piece of content for me is a piece that tells a good story. That's pretty much it. If you grab me with a narrative, no matter how long or how short, I'm going to be consuming that content. You know, so what's the goal of your content, and what stories it tell me. So it could be something like an action video, you know, which is what we did really well at Red Bull. Super action driven stuff, you know. But for me, it was always about, well, what's the hook? What's the story? What are we trying to say in this
Yeah.
piece? You know, and I think it's as simple as that, is finding that little story. And I think that's something that really matters to me. And that's why I like the long form as well. So it's not just the short, but also the long form. And I think that's why, particularly for myself, I love publications like Vox, like the New York Times, like Red Bull, you know, like BuzzFeed. Um, and then I like what they do on YouTube, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm very fascinated with the world of YouTube. And I always say that the new making it is making it on YouTube, and it's not making it in Hollywood, you know.
Okay.
And so it's for me, it's all these things. It's the core tenet, or the core thing that gets them all, that the common denominator between all of them is just having a really good hook and a good story.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, that's what people relate to the most. You know, a story. What was, like you said, the message behind the content, whether long form or short form. But I was also thinking, like, sometimes people will look at, I'm like, you'll make a post and you'll be like, you thought that you did a good job and the story and the message was clear, but the engagement wasn't. So when you're, as a creative, do you know when, like, I've done this and I know this is a good piece of content, or does the engagement really factor in to determine, was it actually that good? Or did that hook like really come through with people?
Yeah, I get you. I think it's that's a great question, man, and I think it's really a combination of both. I think when you're a content person,
Yeah,
you have to have a certain piece of, or a certain creativity to yourself. You know what I mean? So, and with practice, and with learning, and with consuming enough content, you'll start having a gut feeling of what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think that's something I developed really well at Red Bull, because we were such an operation of such a content operation, at least from the
yeah,
media house where I worked. You know, we were very conscious about what works and what doesn't work. But it's always at the core of it. We kind of had that gut feeling that this piece of content was going to be good, you know.
yeah,
And I always say that it's a mix of art and business. It's a good mix of that, and I think that's what makes content people very unique. Is that they know that the story they're about to tell, they have that sort of artistic side to them, but at the same time they have this audience side to them as well, which they understand the audience. Now, I think one really important point for me is it all starts with the audience. It really all starts with the audience. And I think if you identify your audience from the beginning, it's honestly the process of creation becomes so much simpler, you know,
yeah,
because you understand your vertical. And if you know this vertical, and this vertical consumes this type of content, then you can almost start the process almost does itself, or creates itself, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And it almost becomes like you have a format that works because the format has been tried and tested with this particular vertical, and it's almost like, well, and that's where you start coloring with the story. All right, well, what story am I trying to tell? What athlete, for example, in the world of Red Bull, what athlete are we giving wings to? Or what artists are we highlighting? You
yeah.
know, so that sort of thing. And you know, it's always, for me, goes back to these two things: the story, and I think I should have said that much earlier, but the audience is honestly, I think, the most important part of any planning.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because, like you said, it gives you the direction. You can come up with whatever story you want, but now I know the type of story that's going to resonate with these certain type of people. So on that point, so when you started Basel Meets, because when you, like, for example, me, I started this podcast myself. I didn't really think about an audience in mind. I just wanted to start it and see what happened. I had an idea kind of demographic, and I think you might have had similar with Basel Meets. But
Mhm.
now now that you've transitioned into a company, I think, and because I know you guys have like 6 shows, 5 in Arabic and 1 in English. And I think, and when it becomes a bit more what's the word? Is it the word professional? I don't know what it means, or targeted, or like it's a business. The audience now plays a much bigger role from the
Yeah,
beginning. So when
yeah,
we started, we might not have had an idea of the type of audience, but now that you have, like with your company, it's a bit different. So how does it
right.
work now with your podcast, with like as a company?
Yeah, I mean I mean when I started Basel Meets, I honestly had no audience in mind. I was just like, look, I am just going to do a podcast because I want to do a podcast, you know.
Yeah,
And I've always there's always a part of my personality where I always wanted to do something of my own. I always wanted to do that. Like I always thought like, okay, here's the new idea I'm going to pursue, and I'm going to pursue this idea. And one thing I found is that I started overthinking all these ideas, like overthinking these ideas to a point where I wanted to perfect everything. No, it's not right. It's not right. Maybe this is not going to work, or that's not going to work, or blah, blah. And then what ends up happening is I end up dropping the idea altogether. And that happened to me multiple times over the past 10 years. So what happened with Basel Mies is that it was a kind of a pivotal time for me because I thought I want to declutter my brain, and I cannot think about 10 million things at the same time, because I would think about an idea, and then 10 minutes later I think about another idea, and then a month later I'm like, as I work on idea A, I'm now developing idea B, and it's just like it was a shit show, and so what I tried to do it was 2017, and what I tried to do is like, I'm going to declutter. I'm going to focus on three things. Um, I knew I liked sneakers at the time. I had the sneaker hype thing going on. So I was like, you know what? Sneakers make me happy. So I'm going to focus on my hobby of sneakers.
sure.
Two is music. I really enjoy music. So I want to continue exploring music and that kind of thing. And, I'm a big rock guy. So I really like enjoy that part of me. And the last thing is, if I come up with an idea or whatever it is, I'm going to focus just on that one idea. No business ideas that year. Nothing. No business ideas.
Yeah.
And the one thing I wanted to do was do a podcast. And so I didn't really think much about who the audience was going to be, and why I wanted to do this audience and that kind of thing. So what I wanted to do was something for me, and I wanted to have conversations with people, with interesting people, and that saying, "Build it and they will come."
Yeah.
That was my mentality.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna do it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'll just hang it up and say like I tried.
Sure.
And I think that's a cool quote from James Hetfield of Metallica when he was, when they did S&M, their Symphony of Metallica album. He said, it's a cool thing. If we tried, if it works, we'll say. If it doesn't work, we tried. If it works, then it's cooler.
Yeah.
And Basel Meets picked up slowly but surely. It started picking up, and it taught me a lot about consistency and not being afraid of asking people for things. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so for example, if I wanted, I got Slash on the podcast, and
Oh,
I'm
sure.
a huge fucking Slash fan, and all it took was, and I remember this very clearly, like, when I said I wanted to get Slash on the podcast, a lot of people around me said like, no, I don't know if that's going to work. And one particular person told me, well, why the fuck would Slash come on your podcast? Like,
Exactly.
what?
Yeah.
But hey, man, all it took was for me to ask, and package my podcast in a way which was appealing. And the guys at Anghami thought it was a good idea. And lo and behold, my wife and I went to Abu Dhabi. She was my camera person, and we met Slash, and I had a fucking 20-minute conversation with Slash on my podcast, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And with that, like, it really taught me a lot about like, just don't fear, just ask the question, do what you think is right for yourself. And if it builds an audience, great. If it doesn't build an audience, it's fine. And thank God it grew, and my love for podcasts grew even more.
Yeah.
And then I started getting not involved, but like I started getting interested in different types of podcasts. Like
Okay.
there's this company called Wondery in the US, and
Yep.
they do like, Wondery, yeah? Like they
Yeah.
do these amazing shows like Dr. Death or Business Wars or whatever. And I started getting drawn to these type of shows. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, this type of storytelling is fucking phenomenal. Like, I love this, And I started realizing that there isn't much of that in our region, and even if it does exist, it exists on a very cultural level, and not a
What do you mean by that? Sorry to interrupt you. What do you mean by on a cultural level?
cultural, as in like, very documentary series type of format. You
Okay,
know what I mean?
gotcha. Yeah,
And that's cool. And there's an audience for it, but that wasn't the type of content that I was looking for myself, which is the same mentality that I had when I started at Basel Meets. So I wanted to create something for me that was cool, and so I embarked on Legendary Rock Stories, which is my second podcast. And if you listen to Legendary Rock Stories, it's very much in line of how it almost sounds exactly like a Wondery show. Um, it's voice acted, it's narrated, and it's all written and voice acted and everything by me, with my partner Bashar, who does all the sound design. And with that, we started like sort of that's where Rising Giants, that's the inception of it was, is creating these type of, narrative shows that we don't really have much of in this region.
yeah,
And there's so many stories to be told. There's so many amazing stories to be told, not just from our region, but from beyond, to be told in the Arabic language, and I've always had these ideas of the type of stories that I want to tell. And to go back to your previous questions, like how do you know if it's good or not? It's almost like because I've consumed so much content and so many
yeah,
podcasts, I kind of know like what's going
yeah,
to
yeah,
work and not work. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But also, of course, we pair it up with like, how did it do when we release it, and how many minutes were consumed, and how are the download rates and stuff like that, and so yeah, of course, now moving into that, we have to be much more systematic and
sure,
process driven in how we create shows, and now we focus on audiences way more, like we think about that particular audience and how we can how we can give a story to that particular audience, and also think about the type of stories that we want to tell, and if there's an audience that exists for that type of audience. So yeah, it's almost like an organic evolution to get there. It wasn't something like it wasn't conscious, I guess. It wasn't an overnight conscious decision. It was more of a, I see where podcasting is moving. I know that as Basel Meets, I cannot do it in that sort of format. I can do it with other people. And I think I want to empower other people's voices to tell these stories. And I know I can get a lot of people who don't know how to make podcasts to do a great podcast.
yeah,
And we'll work on that together, and hence the name Rising Giants, which is like, people who we're trying to build them up and make
yeah,
them great, great individuals, and build great formats and great stories and great IPs.
yeah.
Sorry if I'm going too much on my answers, but I get a little
No,
passionate about
no,
podcasts.
no, no. These are the answers that I love, because you can tell that like the guest usually like loves what they do, which is what I. So every podcast that I do, my focus is on the expertise of the field that the guest's in, because that's where the passion's going to come. There's no point talking about something that me and you don't like. So, there's so many things that you said that I resonated with. First of all, I love how you said earlier in our conversation that you had a recording with one of your ex-bosses, and people think he's this intimidating guy and so on. But you sit down, when you sit down, you just have a conversation with him, and then that's like you said, you really start to connect, understanding like this is just another person later on, like in their life, they've achieved 1, 2, 3, but at the end of the day, they have families, they have kids, they go through the same things that we all go through. So it makes it so much more like relatable. And number two also is the questions that your friends said, like, why would Slash want to come on your podcast? Like, who's Basel?
Yeah.
Like, why? And what I also learned in this experience, just like you said, is just ask. What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, the worst thing that someone can say is no. They say no, okay, cool. But in my experience, and I'm sure in yours as well, you'd be surprised how many people are willing to do it when you just ask in like an authentic way. You do something interesting, I want to sit down and have a conversation with you, and that's it. There's no more to it. It's so simple. And a lot of people, you're giving them a stage also for them to talk and share their story, and everyone loves talking about themselves because we're people. That's what we do. And I wanted to come back to, like you said, in past 10 years, you did a lot of different things, right? I know 2011 you did a burger shop. 2012 was e-commerce. Then you did Rahid Feed as well. So, and now you have Rising Giant. Oh,
did I tell you this?
No, so, I'll tell you why. So I listened to your episode on your podcast when you talked about the evolution of Rising Giants. So, so I have a good understanding of like your story and like everything. Yeah.
I was like, how did this guy? Listen to the podcast. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And usually, I have a guest coming on the show that has a podcast. I like to listen to some of the episodes before because that's how I help get better questions. I don't want to ask you
Right,
something you've already been asked like 10 times.
right,
But
right.
from those experiences, during that time where you start something, it didn't work out, whatever, what was the biggest takeaway you took from that, and how has it helped you now with Rising Giants? Because I'm sure you learned a lesson in each of those instances.
Yeah, I think for me, it's finding the right partner is really important.
Okay.
Finding the right co-founder, because sometimes like you almost need a sparring partner all the time. Like
Mm,
somebody that really keeps you going, and once your fuel starts running out, you need the other person to sort of like re-energize you back into the game.
sure.
Um, and um, and I think I'm a kind of person who likes to work in either a group or in pairs. I like to feed off the energy of people. So finding the right partner, I think, is really important, and somebody who also believes in your vision is really important. Um, Also, I think doing something that you enjoy is really important as well, because I think a lot of these ideas that I had before, bar the burger place maybe, was and Rahib Feed. I actually really enjoyed working on that, but majority would be things that I'm just thinking about the end result rather than the journey to get to the end result. So like I'm
Okay.
thinking, oh, this is a good idea. I can make some money from this. I can sell it. Oh, and I can be seen as this tech guy. Oh yeah, that sounds sexy. Let's do it. But then I start doing it, and I realize like I really don't care about this thing. I honestly don't care about lines at a at a bank. It's one of the ideas that I had, or e-commerce. I really don't care about e-commerce. I don't care about these things. And also, I realize it takes a certain type of person to do it. So it takes a certain type of person to be a tech guy. It takes a certain type of person to be a startup guy, and I realized that maybe I'm not that type of person. Maybe I'm not the tech guy, the guy who's going to build the solution to e-commerce. Maybe I'm not that guy, and maybe I think you can need to reconcile with yourself that you're just not that person. There's an Arabic saying. رحم الله امرئ عرف قدر نفسه, and I don't know how they say it in English, but just know your limitations, and
Yeah.
it's good to know your limitations. And I think at some point I had to like get to a point where I need to recognize this is my limitation, this is my strength, and now I need to build on my strength. And my strength is content and storytelling and interpersonal relationships, and that's what I wanted to do. And I realized that with doing podcasts, I'm good at that. Like shit, I'm good at that. So I'm gonna build on something I'm good at. And when you're doing something you're good at and you're doing it well, I think it attracts the right people
Yeah.
to sort of believe in what you're doing, because you're not some random guy who wants to do like a solution of lines in front of a bank. Like who are you? What's your qualifications? But when you're doing like something that you're good at and something you actually really passionately enjoy, nothing's going to feel like a job anymore. Like it's not going to feel like I'm doing something. Like I enjoy working on Rising Giants. I would work until 12 at night on Rising Giants, and it wouldn't feel like a job because I love what we're doing at Rising Giants. And then luckily I found the right partners. With Bashar, our sound engineer, who's my partner, and Saeed, who takes off the admin and finance stuff
Sure.
part of it, because
Yeah.
I suck at that, and I'm so happy to say that I suck at that. And then Barry, who owns Barry Kerr Studios, who really helped us in giving us full studio space that we could use, and that kind of offsets the cost from us, that we don't have to pay for studio space at all. So like it all comes together because it all goes down to you enjoying what you do, and then you're good at what you do because you enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
And so those are the key takeouts for me, to be honest.
Yeah, and it sounds also like through all those experiences, number one, I love what you said about finding the right partner, because even in like my experience running this podcast myself, I think it would help to have someone to not necessarily a co-host, but just someone to like maybe bounce off ideas, someone to just help you with whatever you need help with. And number two is I think what you learned, or correct me if I'm wrong, is like awareness of yourself. Like, I don't need to be that kind of guy. I don't need to be that, I know my limitations and I know what I'm good at. So let me just focus on what I'm good at. Would you agree?
That's so important, man. Honestly, like
Yeah.
I wish I mean, I'm not a regretful person, and I feel like I look back at everything, and I take it with a grain of salt, and I take it with like, I'm happy that it happened to me. But I think the earlier you recognize, who you are, the more runway time you have,
Yeah,
to build what you want, so I'm glad. I mean, it happened to me. I'm 36 now, and it happened to me a couple of years ago, and it's good. It's a good time. It's a good time to do it. But but definitely, just I feel like surrounding yourself with people as well, who give you the right sort of energy and the right the right influence. I think that matters as well, to
for
a certain
sure.
extent, because sometimes when you surround yourself with people that you feel that you want to, I guess, impress or whatever, like that sort of thing, you might start doing things that aren't true to yourself,
For sure.
and that kind of becomes like a limit, like that kind of like deters you and slows you down, and I realized early on that I shouldn't be doing that. I should be doing something that I really enjoy. And look, I'm not gonna lie, man. When I first started the podcast, a lot of people were like, "Ooh, Mr. Joe Rogan," like that kind of thing, and so like you get that in the beginning, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's good. That should be a vote of confidence for whoever's doing that, because no journey is complete without that. Like you
For
gotta get
sure.
that. You
The
gotta get
haters.
that. Yeah, you gotta get the haters. Otherwise, you're not doing that right. So
Exactly.
yeah. It's almost like you're writing your own book. You know what I mean? Like your life is your own book, and you gotta write it, and you have to have those characters in your life.
Of course, 100%, man. I resonate with so much of what you just said. First of all, on the point that I don't like you, like I don't look at things as regrets, but also I look at it as if I knew this is what I wanted to do like 3 years ago, like where would I be now? It's like that time lost. Like where would I be now if this started like 3 years ago? So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
And even me, when I started the podcast, I'm guessing they called you Joe because we're both, bald, so it makes sense.
More like Joe
I
Rogan than I.
exactly. And even when I started, to be honest, I was like, oh, I started a podcast. I released that. I can't remember. I think 3 episodes in, I was like, it didn't feel right. It didn't. Even myself, I still didn't believe like, oh, I have a podcast. Even saying it, I used to feel weird about it because the people are like, what does it mean to be a podcaster? Like, what is that? But now here we are. This is now our episode 47. It's been 47 weeks in a row. So
Amazing!
now,
Wow.
yeah. So now
Look at
so
that.
now it feels different. Now I'm like, no, I am a podcaster. I have the backlog to prove it.
This is
I wanted
awesome,
to
man.
come on. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. So when you started off the podcast, I love your story when you're sitting in the car and debating to get the mic. It's that decision. That decision, like, oh, do I get that? Do I start? Do I not? And then you did, and you went and did it, and you committed. And I think, like you said, this is what you liked anyway, so it felt more natural to you. But I'm curious. So when were you starting the podcast? How did you go about like finding guests? How consistent did you want to be? Walk us through like that early days journey, because I think a lot of people starting out would find that quite useful.
Look, I think it's I did it like I opened my Excel sheet, and then I put like the names of anybody who I thought is going to be will have an interesting story.
Okay.
And then when I knew that, for example, there are certain individuals who are going to be in Dubai, I would also try to see who's organizing that particular event and see if I could get that guest on. So yeah, so like it was a combination of people between people I liked on Twitter. I love Twitter, so like I follow some really interesting people, and I try to get them on the show. And I think the tough one was like just the technical thing in the beginning was I was like, well, how do you start a podcast? Like, all right, I know I
Sure.
need a
Yeah.
mic. Like, okay, well, I need to like clean this content. I need to. I don't know any of this stuff. I don't know how to edit audio. I don't know how to edit a video. I don't know any of this stuff. Luckily, I had a GoPro that I guess my parents or my wife got me. I'm not sure who. Somebody got me on my birthday at some point. Um, and uh, and then I used that to film my podcast in the beginning. And then
Okay.
GoPro is really easy to edit. So I used that in the beginning and how to do it. So that's from the video element. The audio one, I used Blueberry, which is no, actually, sorry, I used GarageBand to edit, and then I used
Okay.
Blueberry to release. So there had to be a little learning curve there in the beginning. but I was excited because I actually did my first episode before I engrossed myself in any of these things. Because if I did engross myself in any of these things in the beginning, then I would probably would have been deterred, and I was like, I don't have time to do any
Yeah,
of
yeah,
this.
yeah, for
You know?
sure.
But luckily my wife was also doing her master's, and because we spent a lot of time together and did stuff together and whatever. So on Saturdays I had a lot of dead time. Like she had like 5-6 hours of doing her master's. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to use this time to enrich myself as well. And so I learned this whole podcasting editing thing. Um, but yeah, then when I put all these guests together, I started reaching out to these guests, and like you said, just ask, and my first guest was my buddy Joe Akawi, and whom you should really have on your podcast. He's a great guy. I should definitely put you guys in touch.
Please do.
He's like, I always say he's my most famous friend. He's a tech guy. He's always on Al Arabiya and NBC talking about tech and that kind of thing. I mean, him also, like, we have a lot of, like, we're really old friends. Like, we're friends since, like, I've known him for like 20 years. And so, like, we talked about all sorts of things, and I was really nervous at the beginning because I'm not sure how to interview my buddy, uh, and uh, and it was really, like, it was just really interesting. I was hoping he would cancel because I was really nervous. But then when he came in, I loved it, and so I couldn't wait to put it out. And the reception was amazing. Like, a lot of really positive feedback came from people. So I thought it gave me this, like, instant gratification, and
Yeah, yeah.
I could do this always, like, on a weekly basis. And I started doing it on a weekly basis. And it was the first thing I really committed to in a really long time. And yeah, like, there was this band called Sepultura. They're a heavy metal band. They were in Dubai. And I asked if I could talk to their guitarist, Andreas Kisser. And they're like, yeah, sure. I was like, first podcast in the region, #1. Like, I just, like, packaged Basel Meets, like, probably had like 300 listeners at the time. But they're like, yeah, sure, okay. You can talk to Andreas Kisser. And it was really cool. I talked to him, and that started getting built more and more and more. I paused it a little bit during COVID because I got really disheartened with this type of conversation. Like, it was like the digital type, which, I really enjoyed the face-to-face thing. It almost felt like I'm going into my own bubble, and, like, I'm meeting this person, and we're having a really nice 1 hour of conversation, which is really meaningful. So when we started doing it remotely, I was like, this doesn't really work for me. But then and then of course we went into building Rising Giants and stuff. So I got really busy. But now we're bringing it back, and I just released our first episode, and season 3, I'm calling it. And I did another episode yesterday, and I'm recording a couple more next week. Yeah, we're bringing it back.
Yeah.
And hopefully when I get the vaccine and my guests get vaccinated, we can bring back the face-to-face thing and do it more often face-to-face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you so it's funny that you said the whole quarantine thing, because I started my podcast during quarantine. So I remember my first 3 episodes were or 4 were face to face, and then boom, lockdown, and I'm like, oh shit, man, I just started this thing, and, like, what am I gonna do now? Like, how am I gonna get content? How am I gonna interview people? How's this gonna work? So virtual has been like my home for, like, a lot of people, but alhamdulillah, also with that, I've gone to interview people from across the world, in Malaysia and Canada and the States. So, like, it's really expanded the range of the podcast. So I'm grateful for it, but I am like you. I do prefer the face-to-face. It's just a different energy when you're, like, sitting across a person. So I totally understand. And
100%.
So when you started the podcast, like you said, first episode was with Joe. How did as the podcast grew and, like, evolved, did you start having, like, what was your thought process with the guest? Like, so you'd bring a guest on, did you start preparing questions? Was there, like, a certain story or theme that you knew you wanted to cover with that guest? What did that process look like? Or was it just, come on, let's have a conversation about, whatever?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm like your total opposite, man. I do not prepare. Like,
Okay.
I don't, like, I just know that this is what they do. And the reason I asked them on is because they have an interesting story of some sorts. And I know that I want to get to that story. But I leave it up to the guest to navigate. And then I pick on cues from the guest and what the guest said. And if I pick up something that's really interesting, I steer the conversation in that direction. But honestly, in my entire time for Basel Meets, I've only prepared twice. Once was for Slash, just because I had 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I knew that there was certain things I can and cannot ask. So for example, they asked me not to ask anything around Guns N' Roses, and I can only ask about solo band and that kind of thing, even though he was playing in Abu Dhabi as part of Guns N' Roses, you know. So it was really challenging for me to get, you know, to talk to the fucking guy from, sorry, I'm swearing.
This is your show, bro. You can do whatever you want. The guest decides.
So it was really tough for me to talk to the, you know, the co-founder of Guns N' Roses without talking about Guns N' Roses. But anyway, I found an angle about his new album and like that sort of thing. And funnily enough, there was one song that I loved on his album that I asked him about. And he told me, and that's why I think an episode writes itself. He told me that, you know, that song, that particular song, he pitched it to be one of the songs in The Walking Dead, the series The Walking Dead, and it was rejected. So, and then he took it and he created his own song with it. But then I sent that out to like publications as a press release, and that got wildfire, picked up like wildfire, you know, I'm telling you, like from GQ to The Independent to like all these major publications picked it up, which was pretty insane. So that's one. Two is another guy called Alex Skolnick. He's a guitar player for a band called Testament, another heavy metal band, you know, like rock and roll. And again, I had like a limited amount of time. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, I'm talking to one of the legends of thrash, you know, and I want to make sure that I get my, you know, my fanboyism in there, you know, but in a structured way. You know? Those are the only two times, but other than that, I really don't prepare, man. Like yesterday, I was talking to Luay, the head of GM, and to be honest, he just said a few things, and I just played on the things that he was saying, you know. And sometimes, like with some guests, you feel like you're not getting that energy, and you're not getting that response. So you almost have to inject more of yourself into the conversation, 100%. Just to get into, you know, to talk more and to be more comfortable, you know. So yeah, I guess that's I don't really have a real process, man. That's really what it is. But I'm impressed with you though. Like you're really on your game, man. You're really on top of the ball. Like you really know a lot of things about the guests before they come on, and I think that's, you know, that's one way that's really good as well.
First of all, thank you for the kind words, man. The way I see it is, I think each podcast has a different like goal, right? With yours, it's all about telling, like storytelling. You want to know about the guest's story, whatever it might be, and into you in the conversation, you'll guide it based on, you know, what they're saying. With mine, the whole point behind this podcast is to help people. So I'm like, okay, I have a guest coming on. They're an expert in their field. First of all, I want to respect the guests giving me their time. So I want to do as much research as possible, because then that makes me have better questions and a better conversation. And two, that's how, if someone's listening to this now, they want to start a podcast, they'll be like, there's so much from what we've already spoken about that you've said about your journey and your story that I can be like, okay, so that's what I should think about when I start a podcast, like the audience, like the equipment, like how to start. So I think it just depends on what, everyone has their own formula, and it just goes down to whatever you prefer. But I'm curious, because you like doing it, I guess, more free flow than what I do. How is it when you had it questioned? Did you like it, or did you prefer, like, you wish I had more time to really just like let loose and like have like more of a conversation?
I always prefer the let loose, but even my questions were cues. They weren't really questions. So like I just had my iPad in front of me and I had cues like you know, thrash, 1984. You know what I mean? Just something to get my mind in a track rather than anything else. But I don't have time to read a question, and I feel like it's awkward. I interviewed James Hetfield once from Metallica, and this was my first one. And I think also that if I ever wanted to repeat an interview, it would have been that, because that is when I wrote down questions. But to be fair, I was also kind of nervous because I'm
of course, come on,
a huge Metallica fan, you know, and sitting with James Hetfield, and I knew I had just 15 minutes with James Hetfield. You know, I really needed to get those questions in there, you know, like album, hey, do you check Instagram? Do you see yourself? Well, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal. Like it was one of the best 15 minutes of my life. But yeah, I think that was the only time I had questions. But otherwise, it's just cues.
Just cues, yeah. No, but it makes, like I said, it makes a lot of sense. Everyone has their own process. I was curious because Basel Meets is it's a conversation, it's an interview show, and I've had a lot of a couple of my friends recently telling me like, Khalid, you should do a solo episode, and then coincidentally I listened to yours, which was a fully solo episode. So because I've always been on the fence about it. I'm like, am I that interesting? Like, I don't know. Like, what would I talk about? What would I say? Like, when there's a guest, it's easy. I bounce off whatever the guest says. So how was that experience for you doing the solo episode? Did you enjoy it? Did you not like it? What did you think?
I mean, the only reason I did it is because I had some updates, and I felt like I owe it to the subscriber and the listener to like, wait, yo, I've been missing for a while. This is why I've been missing, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I'd be honest, like, I'm not a big fan of being like just talking about myself or you know, like I just find it awkward, you know.
I feel you.
So like, I would only do it if like there's a real reason to do it, you know.
Yeah.
Like even right now we're talking, like I'm not talking about myself per se. I'm talking about my experience, you know, like you know, things that I've been through and that kind of thing. And I'd like to share that with you and that kind of thing. But otherwise, I just find it weird because I don't know, to like it's weird for me to what's self-flattery versus what's valuable, you know. And I always try to be on the part of valuable, you know, give some valuable information in return. I've always been like that with everything. Like I don't like praise where it's not due, for example, you know. For example, we've raised this money and that kind of thing for Rising Giants, and I just found it really odd people congratulating me, you know, like, congratulations, like I didn't get married, I didn't get, you know, like I mean, I don't do anything that's like, yeah, we got funding, which is great, and I agree it's a milestone, but like I found it odd because I got to make it work, you know. Like, so congratulate me when it works, you know. Don't congratulate me when I just like we're still on the journey, you know. It's weird, and I know that I shouldn't be this way, and I should work on that. But that's something that like I have an issue with.
Yeah, no, but I understand that. I can really resonate with that because, like you said, you don't feel like, okay, yes, this has just been a step. We haven't achieved the goal that we're trying to achieve. So like, congratulate me when we get there. So no, I totally understand. And since we're on Rising Giants, that's where I wanted to end up anyway. What I noticed is, because I know of a couple of other podcasting companies around here that do, you know, they produce shows and narrative stories and so on. And I was starting to think in my head, I was like, and from the data I know that those kind of stories, particularly also if they're in Arabic, have the highest like engagement and reach, especially because, you know, Saudi is a huge market and so on. And there's probably a lack of Arabic quality content in the region. So I was trying to think, but why is it that those narrative stories or narrative storytelling seems to be the ones that are the most successful? I've never understood that. What do you guys think?
I think storytelling is universal, you know, and I think, you know, whether you tell a story to a 5-year-old or a 90-year-old, whether you tell a story to a Mexican, American, an Arab, whoever, like, a story is a story, and everybody loves stories, you know. And I think taking somebody through an immersive storytelling experience is, it takes them away for a while, you know, like it kind of removes you from your reality. So if you're like driving between your job and your house or your job, whatever, and you're listening to a podcast in those 20 minutes, you're almost like transformed. Like the traffic doesn't matter anymore. Your worries don't matter anymore. Like you're just immersed in this story right now, you know, and that's, I think, the value that and you can get value out of it. That's another thing. You can get some value or some kind of moral out of this. And it enriches you, you know, it enriches your thinking, enriches your, you know, whatever it is, all these angles that a story can give you, you get that enrichment out of it. So I think that's what it is. I think those are the key things that get people or make these type of shows more successful. Look, I think conversational shows also are successful. Like they, you know, like you could look at Joe Rogan. He's the biggest podcaster in the world. You know, it's the biggest podcast in the world. So there's no doubt that Joe Rogan is the big kahuna when it comes to podcasts, you know.
For sure.
And then you have a lot of them that are conversational. Like I like Nikki Glaser's show, You Up, it's called. It's like a comedy show. It's really good. It's on Sirius XM. I mean, it's not really a podcast, but still, I mean, it's really good. There's also Your Mom's House. You know, there's Your Mom's Basement. Sorry. There's also some of the guys here, like Hamburger Generation, doing the great. I love listening to their podcasts.
It's awesome.
I love their show. You know, So there's a conversation. There's a room for conversational shows, 100%. But also, I think with conversational shows, the reason you can't say the same about their success is because there's so many of them. Like the barrier of entry is so small.
Sure.
And all you need is a mic and just go for it. And that's what you and I have done, right? So like essentially that's what
Exactly.
we did.
Yeah.
Just by the amount of them out there, that's why you probably have a smaller percentage being successful, just because there's just way more of them. But there's always space for it, and specifically if the topic is good. And that's something that I always like. I believe in conversational shows still. I think there's still room for them to start and grow. And I think in Rising Giants, if we find shows conversational that we'll take on, we will do it, and we'll add the narrative element to it. I'm just worried, like myself, and when I look at Rising Giants and the shows that we're building, I'm always worried, even if it's conversational, always have a narrative, a thread, and an audience that you're talking to. And we have Ahu Khabriya with Maya Hajej. It's a show, it's going to be conversational, but we're adding a story element to it, and we're adding a narrative thread through the conversations, so it never steers too far from the thread. And I think that serves the audience in the best way. Like the audience always knows what they're getting, and they're not disappointed in episode number 20 that it's like they're now talking about cars. I'm not going to talk about cars at any point in this podcast. You know what you're getting in this podcast. And I think that's really clear. The proposition of the show, when it's clear, it's I think you'll build that audience better. And I think that's why a show like Basel Meets is more difficult to build, because to an audience, it's like, what is he sometimes he's talking about with the head of GM, and he's talking to Slash, and then he's talking to Mabad Meet. Like, it's just weird. Like, what's the proposition of the show? And for me, it's stories. I'm telling you stories through these people, whether it's a Slash or it's somebody who you never heard of before. So yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess that's all I'm trying. So I think just to go back to your question, to wrap it up, it's really the narrative. The escape that you can build, and the narrative and the immersive experience that you can provide somebody. I think that's why shows do really well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point I probably haven't considered myself, because I think when you do, like, for example, I do this type of podcast because these are the only podcasts I listen to and that I love. I only typically listen, besides maybe Hamburger Generation is an exception, because like I love that show, and it's hilarious. All my podcasts I listen to are always about like value. Like, I want to listen to two experts talking and like take something from it to help me. I'm just obsessed with like personal development and that stuff. But I think that also, like, listening to you has maybe distorted my perception a little bit, because in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is the way to do it. But like you correctly said, a story and an immersive experience takes you away. I'm trying to get you fully like in and focused, and that kind of gives you like a little bit of a break to like, go away and like think about all these different things. So it's a very good point.
This concept is also really good. I mean, like, sometimes you want to like enrich your mind, and that's what you're doing. Something that enriches people's minds, and they get something out of this. And look, I think you've got a clear proposition yourself. You kind of know what you want to get out of this podcast, which is like, you want to help people to get something out of this show, like whatever this episode is, or whatever episode you're doing, there's some kind of lesson to be learned out of this, whether it's with somebody else, there's always a lesson to be learned. And I think that's a really cool proposition to have. I think there's a lot of room, for something like that, sometimes I'm not in the mood to listen to like a business wars kind of podcast or Dr. Death or whatever. I'm in the mood to listen to somebody give me some kind of enrichment, I'm just saying there's room for everything, build it and they will come. That's what it is.
And it comes back again, build it and they will come indeed. Bas, I just have a few more questions for you. I want to be conscious of our time. Number one, now you started Rising Giants has just started. You just got the investment. Things are looking positive. What's your perspective, or what's your outlook on the future of podcasting here? Do you think we're now still in like the like, let's say in terms of the industry, in the early stages? Like, I know there's a lot more to come, but we're still in the early stage, or now I feel this past year, and I'm sure once you started getting into podcasts, I noticed, and like, so many people like do podcasts here, and like there's a lot more that are starting to grow. So what's your perspective looking forward now for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's still early for sure. I think we're still starting. Look, I mean, if you look at the ecosystem, you have like, I think just 2 or 3 companies that had like investment. And that's kind of early in the game, right? Like we're still early in the game. I think we're still on the ground floor, if you will. But the building
Okay.
is being built, you know,
Okay.
and
I like that.
and yeah, and I think when you look at the outlook, I really think there's a lot of potential, specifically in Saudi Arabia. They're really into podcasting. I mean, we're talking about nearly 6 million people who listen to podcasts in Saudi. And, you know, when we talk to, you know, people in different federations in Saudi Arabia, you know, they're really switched on in terms of podcasts. Like they really want to get into podcasting, which is amazing. And that shows you an indication of the future. You know, 10 years ago when Twitter was big in Saudi, it was at about 5 to 6 million people, you know, and today Twitter is still the biggest platform in Saudi and it's about 20 million people.
Wow.
And I think that's the trajectory that we're moving in with podcasts. We're 5, 6 million people today. And I think in 10 years, we'll reach the 20, 30 million mark, you know? So I don't see it in any way getting smaller. If anything, I see it getting bigger. And I think that's the belief that people have in Rising Giants. That's why they invested. You know, we see growth. I mean, look, we started this company in July, and our goal was to get to a certain number of downloads. But then by the end of the year, when we looked at our numbers, we had double our goal.
Wow.
You know,
Amazing.
And that's something that's really awesome to think about. That's the listenership has grow faster than what we wanted to achieve, you know. So look, I think, you know, 2 years down the line, I think if there's any indication of what Spotify and Apple and all these guys are doing, with the investments now, with Amazon buying Wondery and everything, this is just the cycle, right? The cycle of what happens is it grows there first, and then it grows and then it trickles down to us, you know. And so what we want is to be at the forefront of this once it actually matures. And Rising Giants and others like us, like Kerning Cultures, you know, we want to be at the forefront of this with them, and and get to where we want to get to. And I think we will get there. I think we'll see the listeners really grow in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you on that. I love the example that you said that we're at the ground floor, but the building is being built. I think that's the perfect way to describe like where we are right now. And I think if there was ever a time to start a podcasting company, given the way everything's moving, your timing couldn't have been better. So I'm sure, inshallah, and I have no doubt you guys will kill it over the next few years with the way you're going already. And that's for my last 2 questions that I ask all my guests. First of all is, looking back over the last couple of years or as long as you want, what would you say is either your proudest moment, or what are you most proud of for yourself?
You know, I think, I don't know if I have a proudest moment. This is really, I don't know. Look, I feel like there's good decisions that I've done, you know. Okay. Marrying my wife was one of the best decisions, if not the best decision that I've ever done. She's been such a positive force in my life, you know. And I'm not saying we have the perfect marriage or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that
it's normal.
Yeah, she's just been, you know, when I compare my life and this is something I do, like I always give sense checks to myself, you know, where I am today and if I'm better off or I'm worse. And I always see that point in 2014, like, you know, after getting married, I always think I've become so much better after that, you know. And that was really, really like one of the best things that I've done. And second is, you know, having my son. Funnily enough, when you become a dad, like you become much more engaged in what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I have a much bigger purpose. Like I need to build Rising Giants now because I need Zain to see me as like a doer and a I want him to look up to me, you know, and I feel like I need to work harder. I need to produce more. I need to do these type of things. So these are, I think, 2 key milestones for me, to be honest. Look, there are proud moments, but these proud moments are always, you know, I wouldn't call them milestones. One thing that I think is really interesting that happened to me was I had an interview with Netflix, and it lasted 6 months. I wrote about it on LinkedIn, but I never got the job at the end. But it was one of the most consequential things that happened to me, and that's because when you interview with Netflix, they ask you to go through their culture deck. It's 170 pages, I think, of just basic what's the culture of Netflix. And you immerse yourself with this thing before you go into the interviews, and you go through a bunch of them, right? It lasted 6 months for me. So like I'm talking about 12 different interviews.
Wow.
And then you immerse yourself more and more and more. And I think one thing that came out of this is this concept called freedom and responsibility. And I think once I immersed myself in the thinking of freedom and responsibility, it became a way I worked, even though I didn't work at Netflix at the end. Like I continued my job at Red Bull and I did all that stuff, but it made me a much better leader to my team. You know what I mean? Like like I gave them the freedom to do whatever they want, but they're responsible to deliver on whatever it is that they need to deliver on, and the freedom and responsibility for myself to leave Red Bull eventually and go do Rising Giants, and the responsibility to deliver on what I promised myself to do. So that was very consequential to me. Funny enough, I never got the job, and I always try to think, what was the reason? Like, why did God put me in this situation? And I always try to find that. And one last thing is going to the US as part of a Young Arab Leaders program back, like this was 10 years ago.
Okay.
And that was also kind of like consequential for me, that I realized I didn't want to stay in my certain role. Like I didn't want to be like an account executive in an ad agency. I wanted to do more with my life because there were so many bigger conversations to be had. And I guess that's the inception of it. That was a really long
answer. There's a lot to be proud of, and you should be. Why not? I love those stories, especially with with Netflix and with the Young Arab Leaders thing, because like you said, the question you're asking yourself, because I do something similar, like, why did that happen? Why did that happen to me? Why didn't I get it? But you can always look back, and there's like, everyone has those like moments in life that like something changed. You got a new perspective, a new outlook on life. You've got a new direction because of it. So being aware of it and seeing where you are today, alhamdulillah, it looks like everything has worked out the way it should. And
I'm on the right. I mean, I'm on the path that I'm meant to be on. Whether it's right, whatever, I'm meant to be on this path.
Exactly. That this path feels right to you. You're like, this is this works for me. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, look, if it fails, we tried, right? Like we tried, and it's my son will still be proud that I tried. You know what I mean? That's all.
That's all we can do, man. At the end of the day, we can't control what's going to happen. We can just control how much we try. So I totally resonate with that. And for my last message, Basel, I ask every guest is, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Focus on, well, actually yesterday, this was a really cool thing because who I had on Basel Meets, he said, don't worry about the things you can't control, focus on the things that you can control. And that totally like resonated with me, because I'm a kind of person who thinks and overthinks and that kind of thing. And honestly, that's something that I really like. I really took that with me, and I'm still thinking about it today. That's one. And two is another thing that resonates with me is if you have a team or you're hiring people, and I know this is the kind of podcast here, but so if you do, then I believe in the concept of hire the best and get out of the way. That's something that I really believe in. And now that I'm in a position where I'm, building a team and that kind of thing, and that's something that I want to build the best, hire the best and get out of their way. Just let them do what they need to do, and I believe in that too. So yeah, I guess those two things. And also listen to Legendary Rock Stories.
Yes, guys, check it out. Yeah, 100%.
If there's one thing, really, that's it.
Don't worry, we'll make sure we'll plug it in. We'll make sure to do the tags and everything. Don't worry about it. Basel, man, thank you so much for your time today and for coming on the show. I've absolutely loved this conversation. Always fun talking to someone who's in a similar industry, and really learn a lot from you, how the way we think about podcasts, moving to a company, and like all the struggles you went through. I loved it. So thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate your time, man. And I really appreciate what you're doing here. I think it's awesome. It's fantastic. I think your show is definitely something that's that has a really clear objective, and I think it's going to hopefully resonate with so many people. You've got a cool style, man. I love it, and it's very inviting. So that's really cool. And I really, wish nothing but the best for you, man. So I really hope this really takes off.
Habibi, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Guys,
Absolutely.
to everyone listening, thank you so much. And as always, hope it helps. Peace. And we, yeah, keep that peace. Perfect. And we are done.